let him in, I said, he broke it on the other.
Why does it sound
He
good?
threw a bunch of snow.
Wait, when you say 10 points off, do you mean like 10 points off? Like
Somehow
100 to a 90 or like 250 to a 240?
From a 50 to a 40.
Okay.
15.1 and 15.3, we're going to talk about Darwin
I don't like that either.
and evolution.
Darwin ate like 8 people.
Darwin ate people?
Yeah, he was like, oh, it's like chicken.
What are you talking about?
My dad used to like Darwin's theory than Darwin. No, Darwin.
Okay, the year is 1831. There's this guy putting together an expedition for the British. So the British, they have this like big naval, they have a big navy, they have this big empire, they need to be able to rule the waves. So they need to go out and do some oceanography work to basically figure out where the tides are, where the currents are, what resources are around in different like continents, that sort of thing. And so they're putting together this expedition. They have this boat called the HMS Beagle. And they decide at the last minute, oh, hey, we probably should bring a naturalist along, like the only person who at all does biology in the whole ship. And they go to this guy that they want to take as their naturalist, and the guy's like, yeah, I don't really have like 8 years of my life I want to dedicate to a voyage. But there is this younger guy who might be willing to do it. And the younger guy joins. His name is Charlie. Charles Darwin. Yeah, so Charles Darwin joins. Charlie is short for Charles. Alright, here we go.
Big Bird.
That's an elephant.
Oh, no,
That's Big Bird.
That's America.
That's clearly the new world.
Yeah.
I like how North America gets noticeably more
Okay,
attention.
Whatever, you draw a better one in this one.
I
So.
will tell you right
Alright.
now that I'm not drawing that.
Kind of look at the screen.
What?
You just need to just make it look like the world. Okay. Alright, I just drew a little map. Alright,
So good.
England is over here. The HMS Beagle leaves in 1831. Like I said, it's a multi-year voyage. They stop for supplies on the Canary Islands. They go over to like Caribbean, stuff like that. They end up going to South America. They spend years in South America. They're hanging out there, looking at fossils. Darwin really likes to look at the stuff going on the beach. He's tracking a lot of like barnacles and stuff like that. He gets really interested in like how barnacles mate. Anyway, a few years later, they find themselves back around over here, and there's this little patch of islands off the coast of Ecuador. Does anyone know the name of these islands?
Isn't Easter Island one of them?
Easter Island's further out.
Isn't East Island the one?
Starts with a G.
I want to go there.
Galapagos Islands.
The what?
Galapagos.
Galapagos.
That's where Emma was.
Ms. Bernheim actually went there last summer.
I went.
All right, so he's hanging out in these Galapagos Islands. And we'll draw a little picture of the islands. And he notices that there's some birds on the islands. And in fact, there are these birds called these finches. And the finches are really similar to the finches on the mainland, except there appear to be some differences. On one island, all of the finches have these like long, skinny beaks.
Isn't a finch a bird?
Yep.
Get shaken.
On another island, they have like a short, sharp beak.
Spiral.
And then another island, they have like kind of thick beaks. And as we know, and as he noticed, the form of an organism matches its function, right? That's one of our biology themes, is that form matches function. So if you have a long, skinny beak, what do you think that's good for?
Fish.
Small
It's good for,
things and-
yeah, it's good for small things. It's good for pecking in things, right? So especially, it's good for eating bugs that are in things. Bugs in the dirt, bugs in the sand, bugs in the rotten log. Yeah, it's good for eating these like little terrestrial creepy crawly bugs. Yeah. Like beetles and little things like that, right? Yeah, you can write bugs or drop pictures. The flying bugs, if it's a flying bug, you actually want a relatively short beak because the long beaks kind of get in the way, and it's hard to be super accurate with a super long beak. So the short beaks are actually better for flying bugs. So like the moths, the like dragonflies, all those sorts of things. Flies, whatever it is. There's a bunch of flying insects that these guys seem to eat. And then on the third island, they have really like stout beaks that aren't necessarily sharp at all. What do they eat? But they're really strong beaks. Yeah, they eat things like seeds, right? Seeds, maybe fruit. But yeah, lots of seeds, that sort of thing. Because you need to have a big, strong beak to like break the seeds, right?
What if they like broke their
Parakeets.
beak on a seed and then now it's gonna work?
And they're dead. Anyway, since these were all unique finches on each island, each one was slightly different, he reasoned that these were different species, which is totally fine. They're also slightly different species than the ones on the mainland, but he reasoned, Darwin did, that these finches must have shared a common ancestor. He reasoned that some finches from the mainland came over, and then they adapted to each one adapted to its unique environment, right? Anyway, while we're drawing the voyage of the Beagle, came over to Australia, hung out there for a little while, and then went home.
How long did that take?
About 8 years. But it doesn't take 8 years to make the journey. It took 8 years because they stopped in a lot of places and we're like, oh, let's hang out here for 9 months or whatever, right?
How long would it take just
Probably a little under a year. Right. This is 1830, so there wasn't great technology, but they could probably sail. It took like a month maybe to get across the ocean, that sort of thing. So my guess is 6 months to maybe a year. Anyway, Darwin, as it turns out, he didn't actually come up with or solidify or publish all his stuff right away. He took all his notes, he took all these samples, he took them back home, he's hanging out. Other people start coming up with these theories about why there are so many species, about how things evolve, and he's like, oh, I have my idea, I want to publish this before other people do. And so he publishes The Origin of the Species, or On the Origin of the Species. And it kind of is the first one to talk about using natural selection as the driver for evolution. So nowadays it's called the theory of evolution by natural selection. Sometimes called the theory of evolution shorthand, but just remember all things evolve. Here we're talking about what mechanism is involved in evolution, and Darwin proposes this natural selection mechanism. So just remember with Gregor Mendel, he wasn't the first one to breed plants and notice that, oh, hey, the traits get passed on from one to another. Darwin isn't the first one to propose things evolve. This has been going around in the scientific world for quite a while. He's the first one to really publish what we consider today the correct way that things evolve. Did you have a question?
I did not.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about some of the ways people were wrong back in the day. And in fact, back in the day, it was the 1830s when Darwin was making his voyage. We'll talk about in some ways they were right. And we're really focused on like the 1800s version of evolution. And they knew about fossils. They were figuring out things like, oh, the fossils at the bottom are probably older than the fossils up top, all that sort of stuff. They knew about like mastodons and mammoths, and they're like, oh, we don't have these anymore. We do have elephants, right? So they knew like about extinction and those sorts of things. But they weren't sure what caused organisms to evolve. Yeah?
I remember my question. How do you breed a plant?
How do you what a plant?
Breed a plant.
You usually, a couple different ways. You can use like a Q-tip, or sometimes you even take like dead, dried bees, because they have like the fuzziness, and you stick it on a little stick, and you go over to one's like anther, and you rub it on the anther, and then you go to the other one's pistil, and you rub it on the pistil. And you have to keep the like natural pollinators away if you want to like track the breeding. Okay. One of the early theories was that there was a complexifying force. There was some sort of force out there that made things go from simple things into more complex things. So the theory was that there was like, I don't know, microbes, and then those became worms, and then the worms became, I don't know, like beetles and ants, and then the beetles and ants became mice or something. And then like the mice became like bigger animals like cats or whatever. Is this how things evolve? No. Did cats evolve from rodents? No, they didn't. And this is still, people still believe this. People think like, oh, you know, humans evolved from monkeys. Like, no. Nobody thinks humans evolved from monkeys. But they share a common ancestor. Question? Yeah. Our current understanding is that they share a common ancestor, right? Everything alive today, nothing evolved from one of those other things, for the most part. Most of them just have a common ancestor somewhere back in time. So yeah, ants didn't come from worms, but at some point, millions of years ago, they had a common ancestor. Anyway, so that one was kind of, there wasn't really, it was just a theory proposal thing. We can refine it a little bit. Another theory was this evolution from derived traits. Sorry, that's D-E-R-I-V-E-D. The way this one works is like if you have this organism with short little legs and it's got a short little neck, but he likes eating food that's like up in trees, right? He's gonna like try and reach upward. So every day he goes out to eat the food, he's reaching his neck up. You know, over the course of his lifetime, his neck might grow just a tiny bit, right? He's gonna like stretch it out a little bit from all that reaching. And then the theory goes, since he's stretched out his neck, his offspring are gonna have longer necks, right? So his offspring are gonna be like, oh yeah, I have longer necks, maybe longer legs too. And then we got a little longer neck. And then that guy's reaching. And then over the course of, hundreds of generations, you end up with guys with really long necks. You're able to get the guys that are able to reach like the highest trees, right? Because they're so tall and lanky, like a giraffe. Is this how organisms evolve? Can you pass on, if I like work at getting a longer neck, can I pass it on to my kids?
Train them by their heads.
Just because I stretch my neck out? If I cut off my ear, are my kids gonna be born without ears? No. If I work out every day and get big muscles, are my kids gonna have big muscles?
Yes.
Like, no. Like, those aren't genetic things, right? Same deal with like reaching your neck up. You don't change your genome. These guys didn't know about genomes, right? So it's understandable they thought this. But you can't change your genes just by like working out more, or cutting your ear off, or like stretching your necks, whatever. There are some exceptions. This is the really weird stuff. Blake, you right? Here, put your head up.
What about like fleas?
What do you mean fleas?
You put a flea in like a jar, I saw it going. right? And it like jumps higher than the jar. But then you put a lid on it, and you take the lid off, and it won't jump higher than the jar. And then it has kids, and they're not going to jump higher than the jar.
Yeah, so you can teach your kids things, right? If I'm like a bodybuilder, are my kids probably going to be stronger than some like dude that just sits on his couch all day? And his kids? Like, yeah, because like you teach your kids things. So there's a lot of like this nature versus nurture. And there's interesting studies where they do stuff like this, accidentally. There's one where like a set of twins got like swapped. There was like 2 sets of twins born at the hospital, and like one ended up going with the other parents instead. And so it was really interesting because they could track like, okay, how those kids turned up. Was it more like the family they grew up in, or was it more their genetics, right? And so they're able to like figure out what things were more tied to genetics and which ones were more tied to like how they were raised. Anyway, there are some weird exceptions, even like that you're able to pass on to your children, and that's called epigenetics. I was at a science conference. That's the reason I was gone. One of the ladies there, she actually did research on some epigenetics. She was looking at macaque monkeys, and she was studying alcoholism. And she'd give the macaque monkeys like alcohol to drink, and some of them really liked the alcohol and are like, yeah, sweet, lots of drinks. And those monkeys, they would look at the sperm of the monkeys, and they would like crack the sperm open, look at the DNA, and the DNA gets packaged differently in the monkeys that are alcoholics. And so the sperm that is packaged differently gets, goes on to the offspring, and the offspring have DNA that's packaged differently. And it basically can turn on and turn off some of the genes in those individuals. And so there are some things like, some things like alcoholism, if I go out and then drink a whole bunch and then have kids, I can pass that alcoholism on to my children. Similarly, like obesity, they think has epigenetic things like this. So there's these things that can actually like have nothing to do with the sequence of your genes, but just which genes get turned on, and you can pass on some of those traits. And I don't know, it might be the jumping too. It could be an epigenetic thing, but yeah, we're learning more and more about that. So mostly this is debunked, but there are a few things that it still works for, strangely enough.
Theory you were talking about, you were basing it off the environment that the kids grew up in and not the genes.
Yeah, so like the fleas in the jar that don't jump high.
That's
Yeah.
what they were talking about the environment.
Yeah, so it might be environmental. There might be epigenetics involved. I don't know. Like they might teach their kids somehow. Or I don't know. It's weird. We're still learning. Anyway, our modern theory of evolution is this one. It's natural selection. Here's what we mean by this natural selection that leads to evolution. There are 4 parts to it. The first part is that there's variation in traits, or variation in the population. So for example, in humans, some of us are tall, some are short, some have light skin, some have dark skin, some have blue eyes, some have brown eyes. We did all that stuff last semester, right? There's lots of variation in the human population. Is there variation in the Arctic hare population? Yes, even though our eyes are pretty bad at recognizing it, right? The hairs are going to be a lot more obvious. Like, oh, look at that. You have dark spots here. You have wide feet. You have long legs. You have weird whiskers. Like whatever it is, right? There's variation in their population. And it's not even what they look like. It's how they behave and how they digest food and all that sort of stuff. Their immune system. There's lots of variation in every population. The other note is that variation is somehow heritable. Back in Darwin's day, they didn't know about DNA, but they had an idea because they knew about like breeding traits. And you could breed cows that give lots of milk. Like that's a trait that's inherited, right? So traits are heritable. By heritable, I mean able to be inherited. Finally, with all populations, this part's a little morbid. Yeah, there are more individuals born than can survive. Unfortunately, even in the human population, right? Not every single child born is going to make it to their 25th birthday. It's just a fact. This is especially true in populations that are stable, right? If I have like a squirrel population in Fairbanks, like on average, how many squirrels born to a breeding pair of squirrels are gonna like grow up to reach sexual maturity and have their own kids?
10%.
Well, how many total number?
8.
If that was true every generation, the population would go up 4 times, right? There'd be 4 times more squirrels every year. So how many would have to survive? On average, each like breeding pair only has 2 squirrels survive, right? Isn't that wild to think about? Like survive to sexual maturity. Otherwise, the population would just keep going up and up and up. So a lot of organisms die. That's just like the fact of life. So, sorry, Simba. Finally, we're gonna tie all this together. If there's organisms that die, well, maybe some die, not even all of them, but maybe some of them die because of their traits, right? What if they had a trait that made them, less resistant to, times without food, or maybe they couldn't run as fast or jump as fast or whatever. Those things might reduce their ability to survive. So we're gonna say those with fitness survive to reproduce. And here, fitness is one of those like special words. It doesn't just mean like, oh, they go to the gym a lot, they're in good shape. This means like well adapted. Right, so it could be camouflage, it has good camouflage. Like I said, you could be like drought resistant or something like that. If I can go 20 days without drinking water and you can only go 10 days, it doesn't matter how good we are at avoiding predators if there's a 15-day drought, right? So being just well adapted to your environment is important. All right, we're gonna pause here on the notes. We're gonna watch a little video.